Okay, sorry guys. We are about to start, but just if you've just joined, so we are Com Collective Asia. We are a mental health organization that works to break the stigma against mental health. If you have not heard any of our talks before, please do follow us on Com Collective Asia. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Telegram. You can find it just by searching Com Collective. We host a lot of talks like this one, as well as other types of events like Com Circles. So we really like to break the stigma against mental health by having tough conversations around mental health, a lot of different topics. And today's topic is about broaching two sides to an eating disorder. I'm seeing people start to stream in. We are recording this, so if you'd like to rewatch and you'd like to see anything that you've missed out, don't worry, that will be accessible to everybody. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and start. Is everyone ready? Nels, Nicole?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. So just to kind of set the scene, I'd like to start out with Nicole and for you to share your story on how did your relationship with food start becoming negative when you were younger, and how did you realize that this was an eating disorder?
Yeah, so I guess like any normal kid, I really love food. When I was young, like pizza, ice cream, whatever. And I think overall I had a generally healthy relationship with food. Like there wasn't any fear. It was just something that, I enjoyed when I was on trips, with friends and everything. I think the only instance I remember having a slightly negative relationship with food when I was younger was I was in this thing called the Tough Club. It's something called the Trim and Fit Club. So, I was overweight and, during recess, they would make us exercise rather than eat, I guess. And so, yeah, at that point, I kind of used food as like a form of rebellion. I'll be like, fine, you make me work out during recess time, and then I'll go out and buy even more food, after that. And then I guess it obviously got more complicated, with the ED. And I guess the eating disorder began, I wouldn't say there was one thing in particular that led to it. It was probably a combination of things. I think the straw that kind of broke the camel's back was, I was in the US and my then boyfriend, made a comment on, something about my weight. I honestly can't even remember at this point. And at that point, I was also we were staying with a family friend who had a gym in their basement, and they were a relatively healthy eating family. So, I was like, fine, since I'm here, I'm going to come back and show this boyfriend of mine, I can lose XYZ amount of weight. And so, yeah, I think that just started the whole process of like dieting and everything. And at that point, I was still slightly overweight. So, it was very slow. It wasn't, there wasn't any like dramatic, like, oh, I'm going to not eat or I'm going to exercise all day or anything like that. It was just really, just starting with like eliminating some foods, exercising a bit more and everything. And actually, my parents were actually quite supportive at first. I think I remember my dad actually gave me like, I think he bought an Atkins book or something like that. And they were just being like like giving parental support, stuff like that. And then I guess I started feeling increasingly anxious around food. And like once again, there wasn't so much like it was a slow transition. So over time I started noticing like, okay, I'm getting a bit anxious around food. It's kind of weird. Like all I'm thinking about all day is about food, my weight. I think also like there were times when, I remember friends getting me a cake and I started crying, and it wasn't because it was tears of joy. It was just like tears of like anger and like frustration. And so I think things started getting very confusing. Yeah.
How old were you at this point, or maybe how old are you when that the whole transition from when you think it kind of you started to think about dieting more, and then for it to actually get to a point where it was kind of, this is not normal anymore?
I guess, yeah. So when I was in the States, so the whole diet thing started when I was about 11 or 12. And I guess like in terms of background, like I recovered when I was about 25. So it was kind of like a 13-year journey. And I think I only realized or got diagnosed with an eating disorder when I was 14. Is that right, Pop? I'm not sure. I can't remember.
Closer to 15, but yeah, 14, 15.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's probably like close to like 3 years where it was kind of like I knew I was struggling, but I wasn't really sure. Yeah.
Maybe I'll turn the question to you, Nels. How did you realize it was an ED, or this is, a situation that needs diagnosing and also a professional help?
I guess I was completely ignorant and naive at the beginning. As Nicole said, at the beginning, it was good. She was getting in better shape and she was getting more confidence and grades were improving. Great equation. Then it got carried away and started to have a couple of little issues, went to see different doctors. But at the time, it never struck me that there was an eating disorder and I didn't know much about them. And it was after a couple of doctor visits that it was pointing in that direction. And even then I was like, okay, eating disorder, what's the big deal? Eat, solve, which is obviously, as Nicole will tell you, just about completely the wrong thing to conclude, say, or do. Over time, learned a lot more about eating disorders, how it affects not just the physical side, but emotional, mental as well. Right. So ignorance leading to some awareness and then a long journey.
Yeah. I mean, even now, I think a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about what an eating disorder is. Maybe Nicole, what was that learning journey like for you? And did you find that you had to do most of the educating, or did everyone kind of learn along with you?
You mean like, so when I knew it was an eating disorder?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think initially, I didn't really know. I just knew something was wrong. I didn't know what it was. I just remember, progressively feeling sadder and sadder, really confused. I mentioned that I would cry when friends bought me birthday cake. I would hide in the bathroom during recess. There's a lot more like lying and stuff. Like I remember in church, I would tell my dad I was going for like youth service or something, I can't remember. And then I would run to the track that was like 10 minutes away from the church and be running laps around there. So, I was just very confused because it just didn't align with who I was at that point of time. And then I remember in school, like, a few friends would say things, very jokingly, like not in a mean way. They're just like, I think you're anorexic, stuff like that. And ironically, they were also the same ones that would compliment me on my weight loss, right? Because naturally, like when I was starting to lose weight, like a lot of people were like, oh, you're looking so much better, you're healthier, like how are you losing all the weight? So actually I went back to my dad, I remember one day, and I was, I said, people have been calling me anorexic. Like, am I anorexic? Like, I don't know. And as he pointed out earlier, like, I think he didn't know what an eating disorder was either. So, he was like, no, you're not anorexic. You're still eating. Like, don't listen to these people, And I don't think he meant any harm. I think we just both had no idea, because at that point, if you think about eating disorders, it was like Karen Carpenter, it was like Nicole Friets, I think, and I wasn't like skeletal thin at that point. I had lost a lot of weight, but I wasn't like super thin or anything. So I think when things started to get physically, like I lost my period actually. And I remember, I told my mom, so she brought me to a gynae who, she couldn't find any issues. So she referred me to a thyroid specialist who then took like, a bunch of tests, asked me a bunch of questions. There was nothing wrong with my tests, I don't think. And, after asking a lot of questions, he actually said, he brought us all back into the room and he said, I think you actually don't have a physical problem. I think you have a mental problem. And I remember all of us were just like, what are you talking about? Like, so in that same appointment, he was like, I want you to talk to somebody. She's a specialist at an eating disorder clinic here in Singapore. And so he put me on the phone with this lady. And obviously I was not very happy at that point of time. I was just kind of like, go away, like, it's none of your business. So then we made an appointment to see this specialist at one of the hospitals here. And then, she diagnosed me. But obviously in between those two appointments, I did like a bunch of research. And I think inside I kind of knew I had an eating disorder at that point. So I was I was angry, obviously, because in that first appointment, she was also like, you have to stop exercising. And I remember I was actually like going from that appointment to a tennis match for school. And I was just like, what? Like, who's this idiot? Like, who's this person, But I think I was also like relieved that I was kind of like someone kind of knew what was happening. Yeah.
Right. So you finally had kind of a name to it. And how did you feel then, or maybe Nels, how did you feel when you realized this had a name now and it was anorexia?
Well, then I did, I guess, what I typically do, which is try to learn more about it and then try to solve it, which again, me trying to solve it is not the answer. And talked, heard what the doctor said, read more things, talked with Nicole, but I don't think I took it, I won't say I didn't take it seriously. I didn't think that it was there was no way that any of us thought that it would last as long as it did. We always thought, kind of turn a switch and things will get better. Things didn't, they kind of muddled along up and down for a while. Probably what, Nicole, 5 or 7 years of kind of muddling along before things got really bad.
Yeah, I would say like 5 to 7 years of like hospitals and like treatment, and then things got really, really bad in the last like 3 or 4 years, I would say.
Yeah.
Right.
But during that time, I guess it was always trying to, okay, Nicole would say, well, if somebody sits with me while I eat, then that'll help. And so like during high school, secondary school, I'd drive her to school, I'd have breakfast there, I'd meet her back for lunch, we'd have dinner. And so that was my way of, that's what I thought was going to help. But as we'll talk, it's a lot more than the physical side. Yeah.
Well, maybe I could ask Nicole, what was that like for you? How did that help? Kind of someone sitting and eating with you?
I think, it helped just because there was that support, and, I'm really thankful that, throughout like secondary school or like high school, like I had friends that were really supportive. Like I was very open about it at that point of time already, because, I had been to treatment and everything. So, them, obviously it's kind of weird, my dad joining us for meals and everything, but, it became like an inside joke. It was like, Papa Nels is here, stuff like that. But yeah, I think it was just, it was supportive, like knowing that someone was there. But I think, as my dad would also say, I think a large part of the recovery actually happened when he let go, when I let go. And, I had to learn how to eat by myself, which, obviously people learn, it's so weird to say that, because, like there were periods where I wouldn't eat, if my dad wasn't there. I just was not comfortable eating alone. I don't even know why. But I just had to have him there. I had to have someone there. And so I think there was a huge learning process of like learning how to eat again, learning that I don't need to prove that I'm eating to anyone, because also like what they teach you in treatment, different treatment centers teach you different things. But, I think for a while, like my dad was taught to be the food police, in terms of you need to watch, make sure she eats, make sure she finishes all the food on her plate. And so that affected the relationship a lot as well, naturally, because, there's a lot of fighting, and a lot of crying, a lot of tantrums. Yeah.
Nels, what was that like for you to take on this role as food police?
Well, it was not fun, because I'd say that for a large stretch of time, part of Nicole wanted to recover, part of her did not. And so it was going to lead to, as she said earlier, there was hiding of food, or hiding food, saying that she ate this, but she didn't. And it got to be, a lot of meals ended up being combative in nature, which is not good. And we talked about this, and Nicole and I have talked at length since then, so I don't think there's any surprises here. But it's kind of tough to be a father and a food policeman and a therapist. You can't do everything. You can't delineate the roles. And the food police got to be, I think for both of us, to the point of, it was definitely a lot more aggravation and stress than help. It probably also led her to rebel a bit more and find new ways to avoid the police. Is that fair, Nicole?
Yep.
So, well, just to a follow-up question for you, Nels, and what was that like for you? Did you seek any support from anybody in terms of like, you are taking on a role as a caregiver, and I know what that feels like to always be worried about the person you love, and always feeling that there's that responsibility is on your hands to protect this person, to be the food police, right? And a meal 3 times a day, that's a lot to think about in a day. How did you handle your mental health actually throughout this period?
I did a very poor job of it. And I guess I didn't share the details of what was going on with too many people, for various reasons. And at the same time, I was always a type of person who would get things done and succeed or whatever. And I just put more and more effort in and failed more and more along the way. I shared with a couple of friends, but not nearly as much as looking back, I should have developed more of a network of support. I've also found there's a lot of other people who have gone through very similar situations. Each one's different, but there are similarities. And I found a lot of the people who, it's like, oh, wow, you've gone through this. It would have been nice to know that ahead of time. That's obviously something which Calm Collective's trying to get some of those people together. And it took a toll on me professionally and personally, the whole, the long journey.
Right, right. I want to turn the conversation on towards recovery. And I know you touched on it a little bit already, Nicole, but what did recovery look like for you? And when did you actually hit that turning point where it's really, okay, this is starting to get better?
That's a really tough question, just because I think there are many instances of recovery. Like there was, because I went for treatment in Singapore, I went for treatment in the States, and looking back, obviously when, because obviously I was struggling from when I was about 12 to when I was 25. And when you're 12, you're like a teenager. So obviously the treatment at that point and like what recovery would look like at that point is very different from what recovery will look like when you're 25. And so I guess the final recovery part, and that was when I was, like 20, 24, 25. It involved, I think, a mix of things. I think it involved community, because for about 2 years, 1 or 2 years, I actually had really bad social anxiety. I don't think people actually like believe me, but for like 1 or 2 years, you can ask my dad, because I think I'd been so used to being in the hospital and I looked terrible, and people were just really mean, like really, really mean, because I looked like death. And so being on the street, I was just scared of like seeing people, because people would point, people would laugh, and people were just mean. And so I was socially isolated. I was socially nervous, I just couldn't, I didn't dare to meet up with people. I remember being in the car with him, and actually for church, there was a life group that invited me once, and I was in the car crying, and I was like, I can't do this, like I can't step out of the car, yeah. So recovery really involved stepping out and being willing and vulnerable to be in communities that I could trust. Recovery also involved, obviously for me, physical recovery, and that's not the same for everyone with eating disorder, but for me specifically, I gained about 30 kg. So kind of like doubled my size.
More than doubled.
Yeah, more than doubled my size in a matter of 6 months. And yeah, that involved, going to buffet like literally every night. Because my dad and I just figured, it was just so much easier and honestly much cheaper because of all the food I had to eat. And so there wasn't like a turning point. I think it was, a series of things. I think, I was just getting so sick of being sick. A friend that had an eating disorder in the States that I was pretty close to, and, we talked a lot. She actually passed away from an eating disorder. And so that kind of jolted me, and then I think part of it was fear-based, and part of it was like not wanting to be the way that I was. But I think part of it was also once I started to be in community, especially my church community, and I think I started working out with like a personal trainer as well, who showed me that my body isn't just focused. I shouldn't just be focused on what it looks like, but also what it can do. So I think there's also like a desire to get stronger, to be around people, a desire like to get stronger, to be able to exercise. Yeah.
Oops, I'm on mute. I've read a lot about how an eating disorder is not really only about, the relationship with food and body, but other aspects like control, perfectionism. To what extent did you realize that, okay, this eating disorder encompasses all these other kind of thoughts as well and emotions?
I think quite early on, just because, with it just became very clear that it wasn't just about the food. It wasn't just about the weight. There was so many other emotions that were involved, like it really, every day was just like an internal battle. And it's very hard to really like articulate, just how tormenting it is to just be thinking. I mean, I think some people think, oh, thinking about food, like that's what most people do anyway, it's like, oh, I'm craving this, I'm craving that. But the thoughts that come with an eating disorder are just like, they're terrible. It's like, you don't want to wish it on anyone, just because it's so consuming. You cannot be present like ever with anyone. A meal time, you're not just thinking about the food on the table, you're thinking about how many calories are in there, like how it's going to affect your body. And so just everything. And because I think food, like unlike other, I guess, addictions, or where, for example, if it's alcohol, and I'm not downplaying that or anything, but you can kind of avoid it for the most part, don't go to a bar, and just stuff like that. But I think when it comes to food, it's something you have to face. Like you can't just say, I want to avoid food. You have to face the thing that you fear the most 3 times a day, or X amount of times a day, and it's everywhere, every culture, every place you go to, it's always central to so many things, especially in Singapore. So yeah, there's just so many emotions that come with it. And yeah.
I think one of the things which became apparent over time, and again, we've talked about this, is controlling food became a coping mechanism for any stress that would appear. And that was, so you asked about control, but that was the reaction. If plans changed, or if somebody said something that was mean, at one point, the immediate reaction was, I'm not going to eat. And as her father, that's pretty tough to see, because you can't shield her from mean comments. as Nicole said, people would see her and point, or she fell down and people didn't help to pick her up. I mean, we laugh now, but she fell down and I got a call saying, I fell down, nobody's helping me up, they're just taking pictures. And that's gut-wrenching. We laughed a year later to the day she fell down with me, and we started laughing and people around us looked like we were crazy. Okay. But and comments as Nicole was putting on the weight, I'll let Nicole tell the worst one of that, but that developing new coping mechanisms was one of the biggest challenges, I think, for Nicole.
Right. Nicole, would you want to share what kind of was the worst negative comment, and how do you deal with those actually?
Yeah, so when I was recovering, as I mentioned, I had to gain like a lot of weight. And so I guess there's this phenomenon, when you're going from like really underweight to getting healthy, a lot of the weight goes to your belly. So a large part of the weight, and I'm not just talking like a small, like, oh, I'm bloated kind of belly. It's like literally it like sticks out of your clothes kind of belly. It looks abnormal, honestly. And so I remember, and I gained the weight really quickly as well, in 6 months. So I remember one time, I went for massage and I was like, okay, I'm going to de-stress because it is stressful, recovery stressful. Went for massage, and the massage therapist was like, I can't massage you. In Chinese, obviously, it was like, I can't massage you, you're pregnant. And I was like, excuse me, like, no, I'm not. And so I was like, I mean, obviously I came back, I started crying because it's kind of like the worst thing I could hear, right? It's like my worst fear. But then I remember I let it go. I talked to some friends and they're like, no, like, these people don't know what they're talking about. But then the comments came more, I remember I was at the grocery store, and because I always went to the same grocery store, the one near my house. And I guess some of them hadn't seen me for like quite a while. And so one of them, I remember I got to the front and she said super loudly, like announced it to like everyone, was like, oh my gosh, like, congratulations. And I was like, no, I'm not pregnant. She's like, oh my gosh, you must be like, you must be, expecting or something like that. And oh my gosh, like I just wailed. Like I walked back with like the bags in my hand, like crying my eyes out. Like I just remember being at home, just wanting to give up, like, because I was like, I can't win. Like, when I was really underweight, like people were just mean, like pointing, telling me, I looked like death. And like what my dad said, like, I would fall down because my legs were too weak, and people would not help me out. They would just kind of like look, laugh, and then take photos. And then I gained the weight, and then now people are asking me if I'm pregnant. So honestly, like looking back, like I don't know how I got the strength. I think the one good thing was that, I'm stubborn. And so I think once I decided that I was going to go for it and recover, I was just like, obviously I would say things when I was struggling and be like, oh, like, I'm going to give up. Like, that's it. Like, I'm going to go back to like, I'm going to lose all this weight and everything. But I think I had made it up in my mind that I was going to recover. And so, yeah.
Wow, that's quite incredible that you can bounce back like that. A question for you, Nels, would be, you mentioned in the beginning of this journey, you were taking this approach to really police. How did your role change as the recovery happened, and what did you realize actually helped?
Wow. Well, I guess throughout the whole thing, I was her father. Run from that. And so my role changed. Obviously, part of that was what Nicole needed or wanted. And I guess it moved from trying to control everything to trying to support and show Nicole that she was loved regardless. And so it wasn't, I think Nicole referred to it before, it's not that you have to take in this many calories in order to be loved. And that was never the case, but that I could see how that would come across that way. And so then it was okay, this is your journey, and you can't change what's happened. You can only focus on today and tomorrow, and there's going to be ups and downs, and we're just going to have to get through it. And I'm here to help you in that, as long as you're moving along that path. And so it became, at least from my point of view, it was very stressful to see her in the condition that she was in. But I had also got to the point, I just had to admit I could not do this. And so it was a very humbling experience. Can't solve every problem. But then I guess I was there, and as I said, just try to work with her and talk with her, listen to her, let her vent, let her expound on things. And we joked about it. There's times she'll ask the same question every single day, 5 times a day. What if this? What if that? It's like I want to hit a playback button and say, answer 3B, but I would just keep repeating or trying to keep consistent in my answers. I don't know, Nicole, is that, what did you see?
I mean, I think what you said at first was definitely key. Like, I think a big part of recovery was you letting go, but also helping me recognize that, you know, you loved me regardless of whether I would recover or not. And I think for a long time, because so many people, and being in treatment for so long, you know, like in and out of treatment, I just felt like I was Nicole the patient. I felt like so much of my identity was like Nicole the anorexic, Nicole the person who needs to recover. And you know, it kind of sucked, because I just stopped realizing, and I think I didn't really like know who I was outside of the eating disorder. And so that became really hard as well, because you're telling me to let go of something that is part of my identity in a sense as well. So I think when my dad started treating me like Nicole, like just Nicole, not Nicole with an eating disorder, Nicole who needs to recover, just Nicole, my daughter, I think that really helped. It really made a difference.
Can I ask, you know, outside of the family, with friends, is there anything that friends helped with in terms of treating you? Again, Nicole is not Nicole with an ED, but Nicole, or any other ways that you were supported?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as I said, I'm very thankful that I really had a really supportive group of friends, you know, throughout high school and in church, and just, yeah, through the journey. Like, there were so many angels that came along. And actually one of the catalysts, I guess, for when I started getting open to being in community again after that whole period of like social isolation, was this girl called Elleris. And I remember she came up to me one day, because there were only like 1 or 2 places I would go, you know, when I was really, really skinny, just because I was just scared of being out in public. And one of them was church. And I used to sit like right at the corner at the back. And I think one day, you know, she was like the worship leader or something. She came up to me and said something like, hey, you know, you've been on my mind, or something along those lines. And then she asked if, you know, I wanted to go for ice cream or something. And in my head, I was just kind of like, what is with this girl? Like, do I look like I want to go for ice cream? Like, you know, but, you know, I think at that point I was just desperate, you know, I was just like, okay, sure. I mean, like, what's the worst that could happen? And so I went out with her, you know, for an ice cream. Obviously there was a ton of crying before that trip to the ice cream place, because I was just like, I can't be with people and stuff like that. And she actually just asked, like, you know, she talked to me like a normal person. You know, I think she asked a bit about, you know, like my eating disorder or whatever, but she was just asking, you know, like, what do you like outside of this? Like, you know, and it came out that I like singing. And, you know, like, I think she was like drawing things out of me that I had forgotten about myself. And yeah, I think that really started the process of, like, I think when people started to treat me like Nicole, that really made a huge difference as well. So yeah.
I mean, just wanted to ask you where you are now. You know, how do you see yourself? What's the identity that you relate with most now that you're no longer, you know, Nicole with an ED?
There's a lot of things. I definitely don't see myself as like Nicole with an eating disorder. You know, I see myself as Nicole the daughter, Nicole the friend. It's just very hard, you know. I was talking to my dad about this, like, because I I think that recovery is a journey. Like I wouldn't say, I like to use the term recovered very loosely, because I think it's a process, like there's so many elements to an eating disorder, ranging from physical to mental. And so when people say you relapse, I think a lot of people always think, oh, that means you've lost a lot of weight. But it could really mean, going back to controlling my food intake, going back to isolating myself, stuff like that. And so, yeah, I think now when I think about who I am, it's just, I don't know, it's just like anything but the eating disorder. I mean, there's still definitely like things that I do that I think, I've learned from the eating disorder, or that, like I still like to eat healthy, I still like to work out, but it's a different kind of relationship with those things. And I think, my relationship with my body, my relationship with myself, it's like, it's not perfect. Like it's far from perfect. I definitely have bad days. And there are days that I do not love my body. I do not love myself, but it's evolving, and yeah. So yeah.
You talked a bit about like, so the recovery journey is non-linear. There are moments where you backslide. What kind of coping mechanisms do you turn to now whenever you have those kind of bad days where you're feeling extra sensitive about your body, or maybe someone's made a comment to you nowadays about, wow, your weight?
Yeah. I mean, those comments will always come, right? Like, especially in the culture we live in. So I think now, like, coping mechanisms for me, it's really, part of it is community for sure. Like there are people that I know, I can trust, like my dad, or there are friends who I can message and just be like, this happened, either because they've struggled before the same thing, or sometimes it's actually messaging people who have nobody, or who haven't struggled before, because it's just talking about other things and hearing from someone who just has a very fresh perspective. It's kind of like, yeah, it's refreshing, and I think another part for me is movement. So that could be going for a class, it could be getting out in nature, like, and I'm still learning, like with coping mechanisms, it kind of changes, for a while. And I mean, it still is, like baking was a really big thing for me for a while, but I think something I've also learned is that you can't put all your eggs in one basket. A few years ago, I would say that CrossFit was a huge like coping mechanism for me. I was there like all the time, everything about it. And when I had to stop that, that was a really big, I wouldn't say I relapsed, but it was a really big slip, because there was just this void. I remember waking up in the morning, because I had replaced so much of the eating disorder for like a long time. And I remember, I had to give it up for a variety of reasons. And I remember waking up and I was just like crying, and I was like, this feels exactly like how the eating disorder was, like what's wrong? But yeah, so yeah, I think the other thing I learned with coping mechanisms is like, you really just can't put all your eggs in one basket. You really have to find different outlets, different ways of coping. And yeah,
Right.
just learning.
Before we go on to the next question, I just wanted to remind everyone that we have a Q&A box. So if you have any questions for Nels or Nicole, just feel free to pop it in there, and I will take you, pick out some of the questions and ask our panelists today to answer them. I wanted to turn that question to you, Nels. What is it like emotionally for you when you see Nicole kind of backsliding? Because I feel like, the whole journey, it's a roller coaster ride for both parties, right? And for you, what emotions do you feel, and how do you deal with or manage when Nicole takes a step back in the recovery process journey?
Sometimes I don't handle it too well. I get worried that it's going to be more than a slip. Okay, so there's fear out there for me. Some memories on that, but I guess I try to remind myself of where Nicole was and where she is. And so a bad day now would have been a great day 5 years ago. Okay. Not just in terms of eating, but the way she copes, the way she communicates, how she responds to stressors, things which used to take 2 days to recover from might be 15 minutes now. So it's trying to put things into that long-term perspective has helped me in that regard. And remembering that, and Nicole mentioned this before, but there's the integration of physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and a lot of times one is getting attacked. You need to look at some of the others to try to help that. And I guess I've also learned, Nicole will say something. She'll say, I feel fat. Well, that's not really the issue. There's something else going on. And so it's trying to work with, talk with Nicole and find out what the underlying issues are and let her talk. And most of them, I don't need to do anything. I can sit there and listen and she'll work it out herself. But sometimes she does need somebody to work with on that.
If you could tell Nels, have a conversation with Nels from 15 years ago, how to deal with this as a caregiver, what would you say? What would you want to know?
Oh boy. That one is the integration of all those different aspects. It's not just physical, not just emotional, not just mental. So that's one. The importance of community, as Nicole said, without community, Nicole would not have made it through. Okay. Which ties into, I cannot do everything myself, no matter what I think. As I mentioned before, I would have shared more and been more open and with other people. And that would have helped me going through things.
Right.
Yeah.
I have a question from the audience, and this one's for Nicole. What encouraged you to share your ED with your dad? This person says they're always afraid of sharing it with their parents as they're not close to them.
So I guess with my dad, like, we've always had a pretty close relationship, so, from obviously the ED got us close in some regards, but even before that, I can't imagine not having told him about an eating disorder, just because, part of that, like, I tell him everything. But I mean, I understand. I definitely understand like how hard that can be, to tell your parents, that you're struggling with an eating disorder. I think the important thing to realize is your parents want the best for you for the most part. I mean, I think all parents have that desire for the best for their kids. And I think it's like reminding yourself that, what's the worst that could happen? Like, you tell them this and, like, really, what's the worst that could happen? Like, they're going to show you love. And while that love might not come out in the way that it might not be your way of how, you would show love, for example, I remember my grandma, like, her way of showing love for me was just cooking. She wouldn't really ask like, how are you or anything like that. It would just be putting more and more food like in front of me, which didn't help at some points. But, looking back, like, that obviously was her way of showing love. So I think it's recognizing that, I wouldn't say there's nothing to be scared about telling your parents, but realizing like, they want the best for you and they're going to show love in whatever way that they can, but yeah.
Okay. The second question kind of relates to that. How do you start sharing about your ED with friends? This person says it's stressful to think how they will respond.
Yeah. So I think sharing with friends, part of that became obvious for me because I was losing a lot of weight and everything like that. And because I went to treatment early, I think, there were things like support groups and everything. So I became very open sharing early on. I learned that there wasn't any shame in that. But I think there were times, when I shared with friends and as you said, like, you don't know how they're going to respond. And that's the thing, right? Like, we don't have control over how people respond. And I think that's the risk you have to be willing to take. There's been times I've shared with friends and it's literally like an awkward like silence after that because they're not sure how to respond. But there's other times when I've shared and it's just, led to like a lifelong friendship, because either that person was struggling or struggled with something similar or, yeah. So I think it's recognizing that there is a risk, that they're going to respond awkwardly, or, you know, they're going to say something mean or something. But I think it's also recognizing that on the other side of that fear, there's probably freedom. And there's also, you know, there's, for every person that I guess has that awkward silence or whatever, there's going to be somebody else that's either going to be so blessed by your story, or somebody that's that you're going to have a lifelong friendship with because of that vulnerability.
Yeah, thank you for blessing all of us with your story today. Question for Nels. How has your experience as Nicole's caregiver and dad helped you provide that social support to other parents who are going through a similar journey?
So that would be one good thing that's come out of this, which is as I've shared more, and then as I hear more, or friends say, oh, this person might benefit from talking with you, and I end up talking to several people, I can be quite open about it, and share my mistakes, share what I've learned, and just be there as someone who understands some of what they're going through. Each journey is different, but try to, and so I've done that with several people. As I said, that's one it's a positive that's come out of this, that I can try to help other people.
Yeah. Someone's kind of asked, you know, what do you tell parents who have children who struggle with eating disorders? What's maybe one, two, or three? Just, I know there's a whole lot of things. What would you boil down to some of the most important messages and learnings?
I think some of the things I said before. So try to understand that it's complex. It's not just about eating. Try to understand some of the barriers that are preventing the child or the loved one from taking steps, showing love throughout. Understand that it's going to be a roller coaster ride. It's not going to be one way, 3 weeks and everything's good. Learn to have patience. As I said, I do that sometimes and I fail miserably other times. But a lot of what I do is just hear them out. Sometimes people just want to share and almost unload their experience with someone who might understand. Just opening that up.
Thank you for that. Nicole, on to you. What would you like to tell others who are struggling with an eating disorder now?
As in others who are struggling with eating disorder right now?
Yeah, like if you, or it could be even if going back to Nicole at her lowest, if you could like tell her a message, you know, what would you think would help?
I think just recognizing that there's so much more to life than food and weight, and there's just so much more. Like, you know, I remember people telling me like, you know, there's so much to recover for, and I was like, no, there isn't, like, you know, blah blah blah. But it's just like looking back now and looking at my life now, it's just like I can't even begin to describe. There's just so much more to life than worrying about food and weight and all those things. And I think the other thing is just to recognize that you're worthy. You know, you're worthy just as you are. You're worthy of love, like just as you are. And I think it's very hard, especially when you're struggling with eating disorder, because there's so much guilt, there's so much shame, there's so much secrecy that goes on. But I think a big part is recognizing that, you know, you don't have, I mean, I'm not saying you don't have to recover. Obviously recovery is good, but it's not like you as a person right now, you're already worthy of love. You know, it's not you plus 5 kilos or you plus 10 kilos or you recovered or you not recovered or whatever. It's just recognizing that just as you are right now, you're already worthy, you know. Yeah.
Right. So I mean, I love this dynamic that you have as father and daughter. You guys are super close. Your dad is super supportive. One person has asked, you know, what if the parents are not, they don't realize that their comments about weight affects them? And how can you kind of, maybe both of you have a different perspective on how you respond. How can this person bring this up in a way to their parents that they would understand? This person says, of course, understanding their parents are probably doing it out of love and want them to be healthier. I mean, maybe I'll start with you, Nels. Like, if just imagine if you weren't as receptive. I mean, what would you want Nicole to say?
No, but forget whether I'm receptive or not. I used to make comments. I made comments, and I didn't realize the impact that they had on Nicole. And it came out at one point just how much some of my comments did affect her. So I regret saying those things. And I guess I'm a lot more aware of making comments to anybody about their weight, especially things that used to joke about 50 years ago or something. It's not a joking matter. And so I think hopefully Nicole's forgiven me for some of the things that I used to say. But I'm sure it wasn't easy for her to bring those up. But going back to Nicole's earlier point, bring it up. Your parents love you, and it may not always be fun conversations. Nicole and I've had some real drag out conversations about things where we disagree or we get really angry, more than just really angry. Okay. But I'd say got to bring it up and trust in the love. I don't know. Nicole?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really tough. I think try to be as open as possible. I know that can be really, really daunting, especially if, your parents aren't the most receptive. And I guess have an expectation that, it might not turn out. I think sometimes part of it is recognizing that it might not turn out the way that you want it to turn out at first, and you can't control that. But you can do what you can, like all you can control is like what you do, right? And so I guess if, you share with your parents and just expect that, they might get angry, they might say something hurtful, but at least you shared, at least you told them how you feel, and maybe it'll turn out great, you never know. But yeah, I think it's definitely tough. I definitely hear you on that. So.
Yeah. Everyone's been asking really great questions, but I have time for just two more really quickly. Someone has asked, how did you find about like ED support groups? Or did you have a therapist, or do you have a therapist or a psychiatrist that specialized in ED?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I've had many therapists, many coaches, and that changed throughout my journey as well, in terms of what kind of support I needed and when. I guess, yeah, like in terms of asking, I definitely saw people that were specialized in eating disorders, because I think, that was and is important. In terms of support groups, I think there was different kinds of support group. Like when I was in the hospital, there's naturally like the support because you have other girls in the same program. And when I was overseas, I was in a residential treatment center. And so literally like you don't have contact with the outside world. So you're literally stuck with these girls for like, I don't know, like 60 days. And that became my support network. And then, as I mentioned, like when I was in church, like that became my support network, and at different points, I think I realized I needed different kinds of support. And yeah, I would say, if you're looking for support, then, like do a quick search online, you can reach out to me after this talk. There's people that I can recommend. But yeah, there's a lot of help out there, especially now.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. So if anyone actually has any questions, specific questions, like could you recommend a therapist or a psychiatrist or someone, you can just message us on Instagram or email us at hello@comcollective.asia. We will route those questions over to Nicole and Nels, and we can get in touch with you. Leads us to our last question. So this last question is to Nicole. How did your ED impact your dating life, if at all? And just to remind everyone, we do actually have a talk tomorrow, same time, about dating and mental health and what it's like to. I don't know if this was a planted question, but it says anonymous attendee. But it just leads us very nicely onto our talk tomorrow. And just to remind you guys, to find out about our future events, we are on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. You could just search Come Collective Asia. We also have a mailing list you can join. So Nicole, yeah, over to you.
yeah, it definitely impacted my dating life. Partly because half the time I was in treatment. So, you don't really I in high school, I had a boyfriend, and I think he's probably gonna be listening to this later on, like the recording. But I feel bad for him, like looking back. I'm just like, I was, just because I was struggling so much, I think he became like my second dad in a sense, just asking the same questions and just treating him like really mean. Like, I don't even know how he handled it. I think at times he must have been like, what the heck, because so much of you can't hide having an eating disorder after a while, and it just consumes all your relationships. Anyone that you get close to, the eating disorder, it's kind of like the eating disorder comes with you, like when you try to get close to people. And I think that's why with eating disorders, there's so much secrecy, there's so much isolation, because it's so hard to get close to people when there's just something there, like with you, I guess. And so yeah, with dating life, like there was pretty much a lack of a dating life. And I think that's still something that, I'm learning, like, because so much of my, I guess, the years when most people would spend dating, would spend going on trips, would spend learning about independence and everything. For me, I was spending either consumed by food or learning how to eat, so there is a lot of growing up that I haven't done. And that's an ongoing struggle, and something that I talk to friends, I talk to my dad about, like there's things that friends have done that I'm just like, I don't know how to do this. Like, I don't know how to navigate this thing that I should know at 30 years old, so yeah, it is an ongoing struggle as well.
Yeah, I just want to really thank you both for sharing so openly and so vulnerably about your story. I think it's really rare for anyone to kind of hear the story from both sides of a caregiver of someone who recovered as well. And so I just want a big thank you to Nicole and Nels Friets for joining us today. And it's people like you who are willing and to share so openly that we're able to have these conversations. So this has been such a powerful session. We will have the replay available, especially for those who were unable to join at the very beginning, so you can kind of rewatch to see what you've missed. So that's all the time we have for today. This was I just feel so grateful. Thank you both.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.